Hey guys, what's up? MadSeason here, back with another video for you. Let's not waste any time here and jump right into part 2 of my Horde race picking guide for Classic World of Warcraft. If you're looking for part 1, I'll have it linked in the description. This video doesn't really make sense without it, so definitely watch that first. In that one, we covered all of the base racials, and we went over the warrior class, so let's go over the rest, starting with the rogue. For PvE, both daggers or swords, I have Orc as number 1 here, and it's basically Blood Fury for that attack power boost. Note that rogues couldn't wield axes until the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, so don't pay any mind to their axe specialization. And the other bonus is just that stun resist, which has limited use in PvE, but it's better than nothing. I do have Undead next at number 2, basically for the Will of the Forsaken. Like I mentioned, there's a fair share of these CC effects in raiding and even dungeons back then. Really, you can't go wrong with either of these two. It's utility versus raw damage, take your pick. I do have Troll trailing behind here at number 3. The impactful racial for them is the attack speed boost from Berserking. Again, same mindset from warriors. Unless you're intentionally taking damage, the most you'll get out of this is 10% for 10 seconds, and at this point, I like to point out that it's a 3-minute cooldown, whereas all of the other actives for the Horde are just 2 minutes. I had them above Undead for Warrior because Berserker Rage lessened the value of Will of the Forsaken for me, so since rogues don't have anything like that, they fall just behind Undead for me. For PvP, I have the same list here. Orcs number 1, mainly for that stun resist, but you also have Blood Fury there at your disposal. That gives a little more value to rogues because they're so good at escaping sticky situations, giving them more liberty to use it, and if things turn sour, get out of dodge. I have Undead next at number 2 for Will of the Forsaken, which is immensely useful for PvP. It's hard to overstate the usefulness of any CC breaker, let alone one that has immunity tied to it. And I do have Troll trailing behind here in 3rd because I don't like Berserking as much as the other racials. Pretty much the same reasoning for the Warrior. I will say that the number 1 spot was a really tough choice. It basically came down to what would you rather counter, Warlocks and to a lesser extent Priests and Warriors with their fears, or any class that has a stun. So it's mainly a preference sort of thing. I just think stuns are more important to counter personally. Other rogues, Warrior charge stuns, Hammers of Justice. As good as Undead are, that stun racial is huge in PvP, and because of that, I have them as number 1. Again, for Troll, Berserking just isn't as good as these other choices for PvP in my opinion. If you're going for a substantial attack speed boost, you're already dead unless you have some sort of self-healing, of which rogues do not, so they take my number 3 spot in the PvP scene. Just like my logic with the Orc's Blood Fury, I think you do get more benefit as a rogue since you're more slippery. I can see getting low and then getting the full 25%, and then popping evasion or stun locking to stay alive for the full duration. It's not bad, I just think the other racials are more practical, and if you're depending on using big cooldowns to get full benefit out of this, you're kind of hindering yourself anyways. But next up we have the Mage. For both PvE and PvP, I have Undead at number 1. Impactful racials for Undead are Will of the Forsaken, and to a lesser extent Cannibalize. And for Troll, it's basically just Berserking. PvP is an easy choice for me since I want that Fear, Charm, and Sleep Breaker over some casting speed. I'd make that trade any day. PvE is a little tougher though. I think you can make a bigger argument for some extra cast speed every 3 minutes. To me though, I just like that utility of being able to break out of CC, so I like Undead more for PvE. I don't think there's really a clear winner here though, and I wouldn't deride you for going Troll. Next up, we have the Warlock. Again, 2 choices here, Orc or Undead. For Undead, again we have the Will of the Forsaken and Cannibalize, and for Orc we have 25% stun resist and 5% more damage with pets. For PvE, once again, I like Undead here for that Will of the Forsaken. As I mentioned earlier, Warlock pets didn't do crazy damage back then as I remember. I mean, 5% is 5%, but is it really worth not being able to negate fear effects that would otherwise get you killed or pull groups of enemies to your party? For me, Undead is a clear winner for PvE. For PvP, however, Orcs take number 1 for me for that stun resistance. Warlocks in particular are pretty vulnerable to stuns. They can't blink out of them like mages, and combined with kicks, you can get locked down quite easily, so anything to help with that is hugely valuable, especially as a Warlock. And I'll take it over the Will of the Forsaken any day. I also haven't mentioned Cannibalize too much. It can be handy, I guess, but I see it as kind of minor in the PvP setting. Like, I can see situations where you get a fear off and you start eating a corpse for a 35% heal. To me though, that's sort of an ideal situation. You have to A, get a crowd control off, such as fear or polymorph, B, have no one else around to interrupt you, and C, have a corpse nearby to eat. I don't think it's too often that the stars align like that, so I really only see this as just a bonus to have between pulls while grinding humanoid or in dead mobs for either leveling or to save money on food or whatever. And next up, we have the Hunter class. 3 races to choose from here, which are Orc, Troll, and Tauren. For PvE, impactful racials for the Troll are Berserking, and although it's kinda minor, bow specialization. Orcs have stun resist and pet damage. Again, note that Blood Fury is melee attack power only, not ranged. And for Tauren, we have War Stomp, Endurance, and a bit of nature resistance. For PvE, I like Troll the best. Like I mentioned, ranged attacks don't glance, so they get limited usefulness out of ranged weapon skill, just a bit of hit and crit. Again, compared to that dwarf plus gun skill though, it is much more useful since there are many more good bows in the raiding scene. The main reason for Troll though is that attack speed buff, which compared to the other races, provides the most damage, which brings me to Orc as number 2. And as for that pet damage pretty much, something to keep in mind back then is that pets didn't have that buff where they take reduced AoE damage. They took normal damage just like any other player would, and the only difference is that they didn't get healed because healers don't want to waste their mana. So while that 5% buff is noticeable, it's not as useful as you might think simply because your pet will be dead a lot of the times. And Tauren I have at number 3. I think they're a good choice if you plan on doing dungeons for the most part, since you actually get a use out of War Stomp. Not super useful though, as you'll be at range most of the time, because remember, hunters can't shoot enemies that are too close in Classic. For PvP however, Orcs take number 1 for that stun resist once again, and to a lesser extent that pet damage. When your whole goal is to create distance between you and your target, that stun resist is going to be even more valuable, and that alone is why I have Orc as number 1. And I think a lot of people will hate me for this, but I actually like Troll next above Tauren. I think their Berserking is a little more useful, and that's because as a hunter, your whole goal is to get out of sticky situations. I can definitely see getting worn down by a melee just enough for a big attack speed boost, and then getting out of range through a wing clip route or whatever, and just unloading on them. For me, they're still a distant second behind Orc, but I don't know, I just like them more for PvP compared to the Tauren. The argument for Tauren is that War Stomp and increased health. It's pretty obvious the value that War Stomp brings as a hunter especially. You stun them and get distance and kite, and with the added health, they do get a lot of benefit. Remember though, if that hidden racial makes it in, they have that increased range, but they also get hit from further away, which is terrible as a hunter. And combine that with your increased size, and therefore you're easier to pick out of a crowd, I have them as number 3 personally. Winding down here though, next up we have the Shaman. Impactful racials for the Tauren are War Stomp, Endurance, and Nature Resist. Orcs, depending on your spec, get Blood Fury, Axe Specialization, and Stun Resistance, and Trolls have Berserking. I think Shamans in general are pretty close to each other race-wise, no matter the spec. First though, for PvE healing, I do have Troll for that casting speed. Like I mentioned earlier, I think healers get more value out of this because if you happen to be at low health, you can get the big buff, and you also have the ability to keep yourself alive, so it's much more practical to me compared to a non-healing class. Next, I have Tauren at number 2. More health, War Stomp in case you pull aggro in a dungeon, gives the tank some time to get everything off you, and nature resistance is a nice bonus. They have good survivability, which is definitely important as a healer. And I do have Orc in last tier. For healing, you pretty much just have that stun resist, which is alright. I just think you get more benefit from Taurens and Trolls for healing. For PvP, however, Orcs shoot all the way up to number 1 for me. Whether it's for healing or DPS, you'll be so thankful for that stun resistance once you realize how many there are in Classic, and how you can go from 100 to 0 in just one of them. For number 2, I have the Tauren. I like War Stomp for PvP. For healers, it's a quick stun and a heal without worry of a kick, which is definitely nice, and obviously useful offensively for DPS for locking down your target. Plus, the health boost is always good for PvP as well. And for Trolls, I have the same mindset for PvE with their attack speed buff. It's much more useful as a class that can heal itself because you can get that bigger benefit without dying immediately after using it. I just think that Tauren and Orc come out ahead in a PvP setting though. In the Alliance video, I did cover some of the more unpractical roles, so I'll just do the same here for Shaman. As a remember, they fell under the same curse as Paladins in the raiding scene. They were mainly relegated to just healing. I think Elemental had mana problems, and Enhancement just had damage problems, but I'll talk about them here anyways because, hey, why not? So, for Enhancement PVE, I like Orc first. They're pretty hard to beat because they have Axe Specialization, which as you know by now, is hugely important for melee classes. And not only that, but Blood Fury for that attack power, and also the stun resist is nice to have. There is an old axe called Nightfall, which has a good debuff for spellcasters. Enhancement Shamans can wield this if they so choose, so that lines up nicely with their plus skill with axes. If Nightfall is 100% your only goal, you're probably better off going Troll for that attack speed for more procs. I doubt there are many out there though, whose raiding aspirations sum up to keeping up 1 debuff on bosses. I personally think that's quite nuts, but hey, there it is. Not creating an entire character for 1 debuff though, Trolls come in second for me for that attack speed, which I think scales well with Shamans. Enhancement is all about those Wind Fury procs, right? So get in more attacks for more chances at chunking your enemies. And Tauren is more of a survival race again. They bring some utility for dungeons, but in the raiding scene, the main things you're looking at here are the increased health and just a bit of nature resistance. For Elemental, it's all the same reasoning, except that Orcs get pushed down to last because their bonuses are melee oriented. Elemental Shamans don't have a need for weapon skill nor melee attack power, so instead Troll comes in number 1 for that cast speed, and then Tauren in number 2 for the survivability, and Orcs trail in third just for that stun resistance really. And I did say that I would cover everything, so next up we have tanking. In the comments of the last video, I promised some dude that I would include this, so probably like 1 person will find this helpful, but whatever, a promise is a promise, and I think it'll be fun. A lot of you are probably scratching your heads right now, but Enhancement Shamans were designed to be tanks back then. It's why their Earth Shock generates threat, and they have various totems and weapon enhancements designed to hold aggro and reduce damage. It just didn't work out that way since they're quite squishy. They could only use mail armor, so they were quite tough to heal, so most players just chalked Enhancement up to a damage roll instead. But for the crazy few out there, here's my order. It's actually a tough choice since all 3 of them have pretty good bonuses. I think for the most part you'll be tanking 5-mans, so because of this, my list is sort of catered around that. I think similar to Paladins, you maybe saw Shamans rarely tank some fights, such as the Twin Emperors possibly, since one of them was immune to physical damage. But for the most part, it's 5-mans, so I have Tauren at number 1 since they get more value out of that War Stomp. The health is decent, but if you're mainly going to be tanking dungeons, you have to bump up War Stomp a bit. And Trolls and Orcs come in at number 2 for me. You could go either way I think. Trolls have their attack speed buff, which is nice for tanks since you'll be taking damage. And for Orc, as a Shaman, I think weapon speed isn't as crucial as it is for warriors for tanking, so maybe that opens up axes more for you to take advantage of their plus skill with them. It's hard to decide for me. I guess if you forced me to choose, I'd go Troll because I like their racial for tanking quite a bit. And we also have the Priest. Just like the Alliance video, I wanted to save these for last since they're a special case, and that's because depending on your race, priests get special abilities. Remember, dwarves got Fear Ward for the Alliance, which made them the envy of every other priest. The Horde ones are much more closer, I'd say though. Just 2 races available for priest, which are Undead and Troll. The Undead get the Touch of Weakness, which is the next melee attack on the caster will cause some shadow damage, and reduce damage caused by the attack by 20 for 2 minutes. And their bigger one is Devouring Plague, which is an extra dot. Afflicts the target with a disease that causes some pretty heavy shadow damage over 24 seconds, and heals you for the amount inflicted. 3-minute cooldown, and quite a high mana cost. Trolls get the Hex of Weakness, which weakens the target, reducing damage caused by 20, and reduces healing by 20% for 2 minutes with no cooldown. They also get Shadow Guard, which is a 3-charge shield, which triggers when struck in combat. It does a bit of shadow damage to the attacker, basically a shadow version of the Shaman's Lightning Shield. For PvE healing, I like Undead over Troll. In addition to those priest racials, it's Will of the Forsaken versus Berserking basically, and I think a CC breaker is much more valuable than some extra casting speed. As for the priest racials, nothing really too crazy in the PvE healing scene. You really don't want to use Devouring Plague since it's such a high mana cost. I think the strongest is actually the Hex of Weakness for the Troll. There aren't many, but there are some fights that have healing mechanics, and if you don't have a Mortal Strike in the raid, this can be a good backup. Off the top of my head, the Ebonrock fight would get some use out of this if your Arms Warrior is absent. Something to keep in mind though with 1.12 is that you can only fit 16 debuffs on one single enemy, so guilds are kinda picky with what debuffs that they want active. So, although this is a nice backup for encounters where the mobs heal, it's probably not something you can have active all the time, simply because there are probably better debuffs to put on. It depends on your raid makeup really. So, both of these are good choices. I just like Undead more for that CC breaker. Next though, we have PvP healing. Although it was a much tougher choice here, I still have Undead at number 1. Devouring Plague, while it's more useful for DPS, can still be handy for a little extra damage and healing to keep yourself alive. As for the Touch of Weakness, this isn't huge in my opinion. It's just a little buff to throw on to slightly reduce some damage. On the other hand, for Troll, the Hex of Weakness gets much more valuable in PvP situations, I think. Any healing reduction is very useful, and if you worry about the mana cost, you can even cast the lower rank ones, and you'll still get the 20% reduction out of it. As for Shadow Guard, this may seem sucky at first, but there does exist a talent called Blackout for priests, which gives shadow damage a 10% chance to stun the target for 3 seconds if you max it out. So this shield can save your butt, since it is shadow damage. I think if you're just talking about these priest racials, Troll actually wins, but what pushes Undead over for me is that Will of the Forsaken once again. That Fear, Charm, and Sleep Breaker is just too much to pass up in a PvP setting without contending against orcs, as good as the racials are for the Troll priests. It's another one that isn't really clear though in my opinion. If I saw a Troll priest running around, I can respect why they made that choice, certainly. For PvE and PvP DPS on the other hand, it is a pretty easy choice for me. Undead Shadow Priests gave me nightmares back in the day. I think that they were the best 1v1 class in the entire game, maybe being countered only by a Retribution Paladin or something. With Devouring Plague being shadow damage and healing the priest, they just pump out so much damage, and combined with their shields, are quite tanky as well. Really, they're one of the reasons why I value Stoneform so much in my Alliance video. So for PvP, I think it's an easy choice here. It's a Fear Breaker and a Super Dot versus some casting speed, a healing debuff, and a stun shield with the proper talents. For me, I'd pick Undead any day. As for PvE, like I said in the Alliance video, Shadow Priests had mana problems, so they weren't the best, but they had a nice debuff that definitely gave them some value. I still like Undead, since I think the priest racials are pretty even, and I just personally prefer Will over Berserking. Devouring Plague I don't put too much value on since you're so mana starved anyways, but if it's a do or die situation and you need a lot of damage quickly, it's an option. And next, we have the hardest class out of all of them. This was the reason why this video took so long to make. Again, I'll let you guess on why I made these choices. But that's about it. Dang, these videos turned out to be much longer than the Alliance one. Sorry about that, but again, the Horde have such great racials that a lot of these required more thought and explanation. People used to say that if you want to be the best at PvP, you go Horde, and I gotta tell you, I agree with them. Alliance racials are strong in their own right, but the Horde just take them to the next level in a vanilla setting, I think. And PvE as well. It's harder to find a race and class combination that doesn't synergize well as Horde in my opinion. They're just good all around. Note that these are just my opinions. I don't pretend to be all-knowing in this game, but at the very least, I hope that my logic sort of helped you in your choices. If I got anything wrong, just like the Alliance video, I'll have a pinned comment that'll update if I made any major errors, so definitely check that out. And just look at the comments in general. People often post stuff that I didn't think of, so you'd benefit from giving those a read as well before you make your decision. Remember, it's permanent this time. No race changes, no faction changes, or even a barber shop, so think carefully about what exactly you want to do in the game and go from there. If the Alliance is more your speed, I'll have a full guide similar to this one linked in the description for you. And now that I have both factions covered, I think I might work on a class picking guide next, so keep an eye out for that if you enjoyed this. I hope that you found the video helpful, like it if you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.